Elizabeth Harper had always believed in love built on trust, sacrifice, and partnership. A brilliant financial analyst living in Boston, she had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder. At 32, she was respected at her firm, had just bought her first home, and believed she had found her person, Jason Miller. Jason was charming, with a smile that could disarm anyone. They met at a charity gala downtown. He was managing a struggling tech startup and had a way of speaking that made everything sound possible. Elizabeth, guarded by nature, found herself drawn to his optimism. Within a year, they were married. But reality began to seep in quickly after the wedding. Jason's company was barely staying afloat, and he was constantly borrowing, first from friends, then from Elizabeth. Still, she held on. Love, she reminded herself, wasn't just about the easy days. The real blow came 6 months into their marriage when Jason confessed his parents, Carl and Carolyn Miller, were drowning in debt, $200,000 of it. Elizabeth's instincts told her to be cautious, but she saw the worry in Jason's eyes and the shame in his voice. "They're not bad people," he pleaded. "They just made some bad investments. I can't let them lose everything." After long, restless nights, Elizabeth made the decision. She met with a financial advisor, pulled money from her savings, and used her excellent credit to consolidate and cover the Millers' debts. She even structured a repayment plan, though she never expected to see the money again. Jason was grateful, at first. His parents, not so much. Carolyn, a sharp-tongued woman in her late 50s, barely muttered a thank you. Carl offered a limp handshake. "You didn't have to," he said, almost as if annoyed she had. The air in the Miller household grew colder over time. Elizabeth began noticing the small things: Carolyn's refusal to include her in family decisions, Jason's increasingly frequent late nights, and the empty conversations at dinner. She told herself it was just stress. The weight of the debt. The pressure of helping everyone. Then came the silence. Jason stopped sharing details of his work, his moods changed unpredictably, and one night, he came home drunk, muttering someone else's name. Elizabeth didn't say a word. She waited. She watched. The breaking point came one ordinary Wednesday evening. Elizabeth came home to find Jason sitting in the living room, his parents unusually cheerful on the couch. Jason didn't bother to stand. "I need to talk to you," he said coldly. Elizabeth stood still, her heart steady. "I'm listening." He looked her straight in the eye, like a man reading from a script. "Pack your things. You need to get out. I've got someone else now. Someone better." For a second, silence swallowed the room. Then Carolyn smiled. Carl nodded approvingly. Elizabeth slowly looked at each of them, noticing how little they cared. After everything. After the sacrifices. After the trust. She didn't cry. Instead, she let out a small, unexpected laugh. Jason's expression twitched, unsure. Carolyn's eyes narrowed. Elizabeth calmly walked past them, pulled her handbag off the dining chair, and looked over her shoulder. "You forgot something," she said quietly. Jason frowned. "What?" But she didn't answer. Not yet. She stepped outside into the cool Boston air, the sunset painting the sky in orange and crimson, and took a deep breath. She had let her heart lead for too long. Now it was time to let her mind take over. The next morning, Elizabeth awoke not to the sound of a husband snoring beside her or the faint clinking of coffee cups from the kitchen, but to silence. She was in a quiet Airbnb downtown, a loft apartment she booked for a week. She hadn't even packed much the night before, just her laptop, a few clothes, and the documents she always kept in a fireproof folder. Jason hadn't called. Not a text. Not a question about where she'd gone. Not even a thanks for the hundreds of thousands she'd poured into saving his family from bankruptcy. She didn't expect one. But she knew better than to react emotionally. Elizabeth Harper had made her career on staying calm in chaos. She spent that morning calling her lawyer, Michelle Pearson, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp tongue and even sharper legal instincts. "I think it's time we talk about asset control," Elizabeth said. Michelle, on the other end, gave a low chuckle. Took him long enough to show his true colors. You want to play hard or burn the whole house down? Elizabeth smiled into the phone. I want the deed back in my hand, Michelle. And I want it fast. Meanwhile, across town, Jason had moved on like a man with no consequences. Tiffany, yes, with an I, was a 26-year-old fitness coach with a large Instagram following and zero understanding of boundaries. She had moved into Elizabeth's house that same night, sipping wine in Elizabeth's kitchen, watching movies in Elizabeth's living room, wearing a silk robe Elizabeth had left behind. Jason felt proud. Victorious, even. He had a new woman, his parents adored her, and his wife, the burden, the nag, the financial officer of the marriage, was finally out of the picture. What he didn't realize, of course, was that almost everything around him was still legally tied to Elizabeth. The house? Bought in her name. The luxury car in the driveway? Leased through her business account. Even the tech startup Jason ran? Initially bankrolled with Elizabeth's investment. And the kicker? The legal paperwork for the debt payments she'd made to save his parents? Also in her name, documented and signed. She hadn't just helped, she had kept receipts. Back at the house, Carolyn was more than content. Tiffany is so much more easygoing, she told her son over dinner. She doesn't question things like Liz used to. That's because she doesn't understand anything, Carl muttered under his breath. But Jason was convinced he'd traded up. He was wrong. 3 days later, Jason was served. At 9:17 a.m., a man in a brown blazer knocked on the door, asked for Jason Miller, and handed him a thick envelope. Jason opened it slowly as Carolyn hovered behind him. His face paled. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer. The document in his hand was a formal notice. Elizabeth was enforcing her legal claim over the property. He had 30 days to vacate, or the court would begin eviction proceedings. She can't do this, Jason muttered, almost to himself. Carolyn grabbed the paper. Is this real? It's her house, Jason said, stunned. Upstairs, Tiffany was posting a selfie with the caption, New life, new home, clinking glasses, kiss mark. Elizabeth, sitting in a quiet coffee shop across the city, refreshed her email. Michelle had sent her the next step of the plan. Phase 2, lock access to business accounts. Freeze joint assets. Phase 3, divorce. Phase 4, reclaim everything. She sipped her latte and leaned back in her chair, finally smiling. They had no idea who they were messing with. Jason Miller had always been good at bluffing. In college, it got him out of late assignments. In business, it helped him charm investors with half-finished ideas. And in marriage, well, bluffing got him a wife who paid off his family's $200,000 debt. But for the first time in his life, his bluff had failed. A week after being served the eviction notice, Jason stood in the kitchen, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. She's serious, Mom, he hissed. She's taking everything. Carolyn scoffed, folding laundry at the dining table. She's just bitter. Call her. Be civil. Make her feel guilty. You know how emotional she is. But Jason knew better now. Elizabeth wasn't angry, she was precise. Calculated. The same way she handled her investment portfolios, she was now handling the unraveling of her marriage. And she had every right to. The house had never been in Jason's name. It was part of a trust Elizabeth set up before their wedding. At the time, he didn't care. He was in love and too lazy to sign paperwork. Now it was his biggest mistake. The car? Gone. A tow truck hauled it away 2 days ago, repossessed by Elizabeth's company after she froze the lease. His startup's bank account? Inaccessible. His card declined at Starbucks that morning. He had to borrow money from Carl just to buy lunch. Back in her office, Elizabeth reviewed the final draft of the divorce filing. Michelle had handled it brilliantly, clean, airtight, and leaving no room for negotiation. Jason would get nothing. No alimony, no assets, and no second chances. And as for the money she used to pay his parents' debts? That was now considered a loan, legally documented with repayment terms. If they defaulted, which Elizabeth fully expected, she would file a lien against their property in New Hampshire. She didn't want revenge. She wanted justice. She wanted her life back. One Friday evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Elizabeth drove to the house one last time. Her house. Jason wasn't home. Tiffany was sitting on the porch in short shorts and a hoodie 3 sizes too big, scrolling on her phone. She looked up and frowned. "You can't be here," she said, crossing her arms. Elizabeth smiled politely. "Actually, I can. I own the house." Tiffany stood confused. "Jason said." "I know what Jason said," Elizabeth interrupted, her tone still calm. "But Jason doesn't say much that's true." She stepped past her and walked inside. Carolyn was in the kitchen, halfway through preparing dinner. She froze mid-stir. Carl sat at the table reading a newspaper, his face straining of color when he saw Elizabeth. "You forgot something," Elizabeth said, just loud enough. Carolyn turned. "Excuse me?" Elizabeth placed a printed sheet on the counter. "This is the lien I filed against your cabin in New Hampshire. You owe me $200,000. I expect payments to begin next month." Carl dropped his paper. "You wouldn't." "I would," Elizabeth replied, her eyes never wavering. "And I did." Then she turned to Tiffany, who was now standing in the entryway like a deer in headlights. "This was never your home," Elizabeth said. "It was a photo backdrop you temporarily borrowed." Before anyone could respond, she walked out. By Monday morning, movers were at the house. Not to move Elizabeth's things in, but to move Jason and his parents out. A formal eviction notice was posted on the front door. Tiffany's Instagram went silent. Jason, now sleeping on his friend's couch, tried to call. 4 times. No answer. He even tried texting. "Can we talk? You're overreacting. I didn't mean it like that. Please." Elizabeth never replied. Because she wasn't that woman anymore. She wasn't the one fixing everyone's mistakes. She wasn't the safety net. She was the storm they never saw coming. The court date came quickly. Jason, wearing an ill-fitting blazer and a desperate smile, sat across from Elizabeth in a downtown Boston courtroom. The room was cold, sterile, perfectly fitting for what remained between them. His lawyer whispered frantically, trying to explain that the odds were against them. Jason barely listened. He kept glancing at Elizabeth, hoping for some flicker of softness in her eyes. There was none. Elizabeth wore a navy blue suit, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Michelle sat beside her, flipping through a binder thick with documents, proof of ownership, loan agreements, financial records. Everything airtight. The judge didn't need long. Within 40 minutes, the verdict was issued. The property at 274 Bellevue Avenue was confirmed as Elizabeth's sole and legal asset. Jason Miller had 30 days to vacate, though the prior eviction notice had already been enforced. No spousal support would be awarded. No division of assets. A $200,000 debt owed by Carl and Carolyn Miller was upheld as enforceable. Jason stared at the floor, jaw tight, hands trembling. It wasn't just defeat, it was humiliation. Outside the courthouse, Elizabeth didn't stop to speak with him. But he chased after her anyway. "Liz, wait," he called. She turned slowly. "Don't call me that." Jason swallowed. "I was wrong. Okay? I lost everything. I lost you." Elizabeth looked at him like a stranger. "You didn't lose me, Jason. You gave me away." He blinked. "You handed me over to your parents' judgment, your girlfriend's arms, and your own ego," she continued. "But you forgot one thing." Jason narrowed his eyes. "What?" "I don't stay broken." And with that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking confidently down the courthouse steps as the wind caught the edge of her coat. She didn't look back. Not once. 1 year later, Elizabeth Harper stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the Harper Foundation for Women's Resilience, a non-profit dedicated to helping women reclaim financial independence after emotional or economic abuse. The media gathered. A photographer snapped pictures as Elizabeth, smiling, cut the ribbon in front of a newly renovated brownstone office. Inside, the walls were decorated with quotes from women leaders, and the conference rooms were named after historic female trailblazers. Elizabeth's story had quietly spread, though she never went public with names. People knew. Her strength inspired others. She'd bought a new home, not the old one with ghosts of betrayal, but a bright, modern loft in Cambridge. She traveled often now. Spoke at conferences. Advised women in situations like her former self. Jason, meanwhile, worked part-time at a friend's repair shop in Newton. His startup folded. Tiffany had left within weeks of the house repossession. His parents filed for bankruptcy 6 months after the court ruling. He sometimes stared at Elizabeth's social media photos late at night, her in Italy, on panels, surrounded by women who respected her. He remembered her last words in court, the way she looked when she said, "You didn't lose me. You gave me away." And now? She was untouchable. He had forgotten her strength. Forgotten her brilliance. But most of all, he had forgotten her name would always carry more weight than his.